The far right still poised, even if they don't get that outright majority, to be the largest party in the next National Assembly. Now, they've been keeping rallies to a minimum. They've also bowed out of a number of invitations to take part in candidates' debates. Some of their candidates coming under scrutiny. Camille Knight has more.
Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella have spent years working on changing the face of the National Rally. But a closer look at some of their candidates would suggest it's been a cosmetic makeover more than a substantial one. Ludivine Daoudi qualified for the second round in a constituency in Calvados. She's now dropped out after a picture resurfaced of her wearing a Nazi Luftwaffe officer's cap, a picture she said was in bad taste. Paul Vert de Soras, meanwhile, is through to the second round in a constituency in Mayenne. When asked about racism within the National Rally, this was her response.
At the
National Rally, we have Jews, Muslims and Spaniards. I myself am from Catalonia. My grandfather was born in Barcelona. I have a Jewish eye doctor and a Muslim dentist.
Annie-Claire Bell is a National Rally candidate in a neighbouring constituency. An archive report by West France was dug up on social media, revealing she'd taken a local official hostage for several hours with her husband back in 1995. Bell brought a rifle, which she even fired inside the town hall, and local newspapers say she was sentenced to 10 months behind bars. In the Jura, meanwhile, National Rally candidate Thierry Mosca is placed under reinforced conservatorship, which technically makes him ineligible, though hasn't stopped him from submitting his candidacy.
I had to wait for a few discussions to end and for some advice as well, because I'm not a veteran when it comes to politics.
An appeal can only invalidate his potential election after the ballot.
Well, for more, let's cross to the northern French city of Lille. He's the co-author of the report, France, I Love It, But I'm Leaving It, which delves into how everyday racism is discouraging many French citizens of North African origin to leave. Olivier Esteves is professor at the University of Lille, specialist of ethnicity and immigration. Thank you for joining us here on France 24.
Well, thanks a lot for your invitation.
The National Rally, as we heard at the outset of that report, has spent years trying to show that it's mainstream, that it's not extreme. But we saw some of their candidates are posing problems. And also some of the things they've announced in the last few days, particularly this concept that dual citizens would be shut out of certain strategic posts. Did that surprise you?
Well, in rhetorical terms, it didn't surprise me that much. I mean, then the big question is whether or not pragmatically this is going to be possible, because, of course, we have, I mean, in my home university, for instance, as well as in plenty of institutions, we have a large number of binationals, because a lot of binationals in France have interiorized the fact that they are pretty much discriminated against on the job market with private companies. Therefore, they work for public institutions. And so if that were to happen, which constitutionally raises a whole lot of issues, and I'm not a professor of law, you would have to talk to someone who is very specialized in the field of law. You know, regardless of whether it is constitutionally possible or not, obviously, pragmatically, it would be very hard.
Now, that report that you co-authored, I mentioned at the outset, it got a lot of coverage. It was, a couple of months back when it was first published. Were you surprised on election night, like so many were stunned, by how well the National Rally did, or through your research, did you see it coming?
Well, many of the interviews that we conducted actually took place in 2022, 2 years ago, at the time of the presidential elections, a time when a certain number of interviewees were telling us that, you know, they were afraid that Zemmour might actually be in the second round of elections and do really well. It turned out that it wasn't true. But there's been this sort of a slippery slope, you know, towards more and more sort of mainstreamed racism in France. And this is not even a year-long, you know, process. It's a process that has been taking a few decades. And the other point I think is worth mentioning is that in the book that we published, more than 90% of the interviewees that we talk to, they don't want to return to France because they're very pessimistic. So of course, what is taking place right now in France actually, corroborates their pessimism.
Olivier Esteves, on a personal level, France has this reputation abroad of being the country of the Declaration of Human Rights. Do you understand? Do you make sense of it?
Well, what is taking place in France is very much comparable to a large extent to other forms of far-right populist upsurge in other countries in Europe. What makes it distinct is how ingrained, how deep-rooted it is. I mean, keep in mind that the first electoral victories or electoral breakthroughs rather by the former Front National took place in the mid-1980s. So it started a long time ago. And I think the other reason why France is somewhat distinct from the other European countries is, I think, the post-colonial dimension, the fact that the war in Algeria still hasn't been digested by many people, although it was such a long time ago, and the fact that we have the largest Muslim group in the European Union. Never mind the fact that the vast majority of these Muslims, and this point needs to be hammered again and again, is made up of French nationals.
And lapsed Muslims, in many cases, who don't even practice their religion. But regardless of that, Olivier Esteves, the French media outlet Mediapart, interviewing some of your colleagues and expressing a real unease about whether or not fellow professors with North African-sounding names could be a target if the far right comes to power. Is that overstating it?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think if you're not in academia, you don't realize the very vast inequalities that exist among different academics. Now, I'm a white man of 51 years old. My father is a Portuguese immigrant, but Portuguese people are generally regarded as a sort of model minority. As opposed to my personal profile and itinerary, there are racialized academics with names that sound Arab or sound Muslim, and they are very much more targeted than people like myself. I mean, I have to confess that, I'm not on social media. I made the choice never to be on social media, and I haven't been the target of anything. But, and I really insist on this point, colleagues that are Muslim, that have names that are Muslim sounding and that are female, and that are on social media, they're going to get, they have got very badly harassed. Nothing's been happening to me. So again, you look here at, structural inequalities within academia, depending on how your name sounds or depending on whether you're a man or a woman or that sort of thing.
And what's the conversation been like the last 2 weeks with, I know universities breaking up, but still with students and with other faculty? What's the mood?
Well, I have to confess that I've been away in the United States for 2 weeks. I just arrived back in France 2 days ago. So most of my conversation has been through email, and it's quite hard to answer your question. But clearly, I mean, there is a very profound concern as to whether, social sciences, the way we practice social sciences, is still going to be possible to elaborate projects in social sciences in France, particularly those of us that work in the field of racism and ethnicity. Another point that needs to be taken into account is that, to some extent, Emmanuel Macron actually paved the way for these sort of secularist or populist crusades against social sciences by making by expressing overt critiques of certain social science projects. And for someone who was the research assistant to philosopher Paul Ricoeur, this is really shameful.
Olivier Esteves, so many thanks for joining us from Lille.
Yeah, thanks to you.
And we have much more coming up here on France 24, more coverage of the French elections. We have more news, plus the day's business. And in sports, Mark Cavendish enters the history books, beating Eddy Merckx's record for most stage wins on the Tour de France. Coming up.